Welcome back. We're talking about the U.S. federal prison release that saw more than 6,000 people freed. Joining me now from New York is Stanley Richards, Senior Vice President for the Fortune Society, an organization that helps prisoners and former prisoners through education, job training, and housing. And with me on set is political commentator and criminal justice activist Julianne Malveaux. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Stanley, let me start with you. As we've just heard, thousands of prisoners are going to be freed. You were once one of those prisoners who were freed. What are the kinds of challenges that they're going to face?
I think the first challenge many of them are going to face is this disconnect between the hope that they have of building a new life and what that life will look like versus the reality. They're going to come home trying to figure out how to reclaim their life and how to rebuild their life, but they're going to be dealing with the lifetime collateral consequences of a conviction. Consequences like homelessness, substance abuse, mental illness, they're going to have to deal with those issues. And at the Fortune Society, where we see 5,700 men and women coming home from prison and jail every year, we deal with those kinds of issues.
Julian, our prison inmates who are going to be freed, are they going to be, do they have a fair chance of being reintegrated into society, a fair shake at living normal lives? Because we know that, as we heard Congresswoman Lee tell us, you know, they denied federal benefits, they denied things like Pell Grants, housing, decent jobs, etc.
It's going to be very challenging. It's going to depend on the support systems that are around them.
Yeah.
The young lady who was in the piece who talked about not knowing how to deal with the technology. I mean, that's a perfect example, but there's so many others. As you say, you come home, you've been away for 9, 10 years. How have your family circumstances changed? Is your spouse still there? Your children are older? Your parents may or may not still be living. Who absorbs you? And then who helps you find employment? I mean, we have a high unemployment rate as it is. And so looking at those companies who are going to be willing to hire. The ban the box is so very important. And some cities and states have outlawed it, but others have not. And so, and you see a Ted Cruz, for example, presidential candidate, Republican senator, who has said he doesn't want the people out. You don't know what they've done. Well, these are nonviolent drug offenders. These are not murderers. These are not rapists. These are people who have sold drugs. And when you look at some of the sentences that people have gotten for relatively minor exchange with drugs, it's a function, of course, of mandatory sentencing, but you've got people, you know, a few joints. You know, even if it's a pound of marijuana, that should not give you a 20-year sentence. President Obama is on the right track here, but the success of this program, of this release, is going to depend on the kind of support services that people are surrounded with. If they don't have any support services, honestly, the possibility of recidivism is very high. If they have no job, the possibilities are just very high. But I think that
Absolutely.
The community interest and many people like Congresswoman Lee, Bobby Scott, Congressman Scott, and so many others are talking about putting those supports there.
Absolutely. Dr.
Right.
Malveaux is absolutely right. I think one of the things we've been advocating for at the Fortune Society is to make sure that we have the services and resources for the men and women to come back and to try to rebuild their life. If we don't deal with homelessness, if we don't deal with substance abuse and mental health, if we don't deal with employment and jobs and education, if we don't deal with those things, we will be doing a disservice. When I was in prison, the one thing that changed my life, that helped me begin to see a future for myself, was education. I got my GED when I was in prison, and I graduated from college when I was in prison. And I started to see a way forward. I started to believe at that time that I didn't have to go back to prison, that prison didn't have to be my life, my reality.
And you know, Anand, one of the things that's really interesting is the programs that allow people to get a high school diploma and college don't exist anymore. And so it's much more difficult for someone to re-enter. People were able to do more education. As opposed to rehabilitation, what prison does now is punitive. It's not rehabilitative, it's punitive. So if you want to reabsorb people into society, before people, in those last months before people are released, they should be learning personal financial planning. They should be learning how to use a computer and those kind of things so that they're more easily absorbed. But again, the sensibility has been to punish people, not to reabsorb them into society.
Well, Julianne, tell me,
Absolutely.
what was the initial reasoning behind introducing these mandatory minimums, which are very harsh sentences?
They're extremely harsh, and I think that, you know, the so-called war on drugs and the just say no, there was some notion that people were getting away with too much, and so those sentences came about. In addition, which Congresswoman Lee talked about, there was this disparity. So if you had crack cocaine, as opposed to powdered cocaine, you were sentenced much more severely. The ratio for an ounce of either was about 60-1. So you get so much more time for having crack than having powdered cocaine. And you know, there's a class issue there. You knew that inner cities were more likely to have crack, and Beverly Hills, Hollywood, and of course I basically am being a little funny there, but not too much, are more likely to have the powdered cocaine. But the genesis of this was this notion that all these drug addicts were running wild on the street, and so they had to be punished. I think at one point we lost sight of what prison is for. It's also to bring you back into society. Unless you give everybody a life sentence, the probability is that they'll be released at some point. So do you want them released to be whole, holistic, healthy, or do you want them to be released angry, with nothing to do but commit another crime?
Yeah, because the question is, if they're released and they can't get a job, what's the point? Sorry, Stanley, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the doctor's absolutely right. I mean, you look at who's in prison. We have been using prisons to deal with mental illness. We've been using prisons to deal with homelessness. We've been using prisons to deal with substance abuse. There are alternatives. Prison is a very expensive option for us as a country. And we have decided to use that very expensive option and not use options like that of the Fortune Society, like our Alternatives to Incarceration program, where we can divert people from prison and have them go to school and have them engage in services and have them try to rebuild their life.
So, Stanley, we are now seeing some changes, and as Julianne said, President Obama is taking the lead. He's taken steps to help convicted felons lead normal lives right now. It may be small, but what would you like to see happen?
I think it's a great first step. I think the next step we need to look at is preventing so many people from going into the prison, and then to deal with this reality. Before President Obama and the Sentencing Commission enacted this change, we have 700,000 people every single year leaving state and federal prisons. In New York State, we have 25,000 people returning home from prisons. 40 to 50,000 cycling through Rikers Island. This is not a new issue. This is something that we've been dealing. The Fortune Society has been dealing with it. The city has been dealing with it. So I think the next step now in this logical progression is to really make sure that we have resources on the back end. So I would encourage President Obama and legislators to come and take a look at what Fortune Society is doing, because we believe we have a model that can help do two things. One, prevent so many people from going in, and two, helping people rebuild their lives after prison.
You know, Julianne, there is a widespread recognition that things have to change, but there still is deep opposition to what is going on right now, even in the criminal justice system. Let's take a listen to Steve Cook. He's president of the National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys, well, prosecutors, basically. Let's listen to what he had to say.
That release has been applied across the board, regardless of whether somebody has ties to cartels, ties to gangs, has a history of violent crime, regardless of the type of drug they sold, regardless of the quantity of drugs they were involved with. It's being applied across the board. The public should be outraged.
So he's sticking to his guns here.
Well, I'm outraged at his comments, quite frankly. I believe that when he's looking at this very narrowly, as you said earlier, when you talked to Barbara Lee, 9 years on average. These people, if the cartels that if they were involved with them, they're probably gone. Right. You know, old people don't belong to gangs. I mean, these people have aged out of gangs and things like that. I don't mean to be flippant about this, but I do think that there's a rigidity among some people that it helps you to explain, or helps us to understand why you have so many people who are incarcerated. You have these prosecutors who go and you get a kid who's 18, 19, 20, and I know bunches of these cases, who got caught with something, and then they plea bargain, and you've got these hard-nosed prosecutors, and next thing you know, you've got someone who could have gotten 2 years who gets 10 or 12.
Which is not really justice, is it? Because
it's not justice at all. And then, you know, the question you raised with Barbara Lee is one that we have to keep going back to. I'm an economist. It's called follow the money. Who's making money from this? Right. I mean, some of these companies, these private prisons are publicly traded. And so they're estimating who's going to be incarcerated by looking at kindergarten or third grade educations. They make money out of other people's so-called criminality, which means it pays to put someone in jail who has done little or nothing because they've got to get their return on investment.
Right.
Absolutely.
Stanley, very quickly, we're running out of time, but let's look at the nuts and bolts of rehabilitation. I mean, these prisoners are released. Many of them are going to be on probation for years to come. A lot of them, as we heard from our reporter, are not citizens. They're going to be deported. But for those who are going to be brought back into mainstream society, what's the process? They go to halfway houses, I guess.
On a federal level, that's the process, that people either go to home confinement or they go to a halfway house. While in that halfway house, they will engage with organizations like the Fortune Society to help them with job search, help them answer the conviction question, help them get access to employers who are willing to hire formerly incarcerated people. There are going to be some who are going to need drug treatment. They'll come to Fortune, they'll get drug treatment, they'll get mental health counseling, education, the kind of wraparound services people need to, one, stabilize them upon release, and two, to be able to see a path forward for themselves and for their families, and more broadly for their communities. Like me, I'm no longer out there committing crimes. I still live in the Bronx, and I'm giving back to my community every day when I get up and I go to work, and my community sees what it's like to make a mistake in life and to rebuild from that mistake and not to let that mistake define you. And at the Fortune Society, that's what we try to do every day.
Stanley Richards, Julianne Malveaux, thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.